Well, I've been vegan now for 31 years. My vegan anniversary was Thanksgiving 1987. So I became a vegetarian in 84, and then slowly by like reading books like Diet for a New America and Peter Singer's books, eventually became a vegan Thanksgiving 1987. Well, I grew up in a very chaotic household. I was born in Harlem, and my parents were wonderful people, but they were very emotional, we'll say, and very volatile and vocal. So when I was growing up, the humans around me were scary, whereas the animals were safe. So we had rescued dogs and rescued cats and rescued lab rats, and so at an early age, I learned to sort of relate in a much safer way to animals than I did to people. Yeah, I mean, the sort of paradoxical compartmentalization that happens in all of our brains on a daily basis. Um, I mean, ultimately, I'll let the car go by. Ultimately, we prioritize we prioritize narrative we prioritize narratives that give us dopamine and serotonin hits, which is how you can have, like me. I'm sober now, but for years I was an alcoholic, drug addict, but I only ate organic food. So I would go out and I would do whatever drugs anyone gave me. No idea where they're coming from or what's in them, but then when I went to the store, I would only buy organic broccoli. So it's kind of a paradox, to do garbage drugs and then only eat organic broccoli. The same way it's a paradox for people to love dogs and eat cows, or love cats and eat pigs, because cows have two eyes and a central nervous system and a profound desire to avoid pain, and dogs have two eyes and a central nervous system and a profound desire to avoid pain. Like, what dogs and cows have in common, the list of what dogs and cows have in common is so much longer than the things that separate them. In fact, there's almost nothing when you take a sort of step back and look at domesticated animals and livestock. They're almost identical. And so part of it's the role of tradition, but then we look at, tradition has justified and enabled most of humanity's terrible choices. Because of tradition, women couldn't vote until the late 20s. Because of tradition, it was legal to own humans. Because of tradition, same-sex couples couldn't get married. Because of tradition, people smoked on airplanes. So people really do put a lot of stock in what's called the is-ought fallacy. In Philosophy 101, you'll learn this basic fallacious reasoning, which people will say that because something is, it ought to be. But under any scrutiny, that falls apart, because that's what was used to justify slavery. It was what was used to justify children working in factories. It was what was used to justify women not being allowed to vote, and it's currently what's used to justify people using animals for food. I mean, when I was growing up, I loved animals, but I ate animals. For the first 19 years of my life, I loved rescued dogs, and I loved rescued cats and rescued lab rats, and I loved every animal I encounter. I loved, but I also loved going to Burger King, and I loved going to McDonald's. And then at some point, it's almost like the two hemispheres of my brain got connected, and I suddenly realized it was egregiously inconsistent to love animals and in any way be involved in anything that contributed to their suffering. So the goal is to get people to make that connection, the people who are upset about Cecil the lion being killed, or watch Blackfish and are upset about, the orcas, but then they go to Burger King and KFC, and recognizing that, in a way, it would almost be helpful to like strip away the skin in a non-violent, I'm speaking figuratively, metaphorically, but you strip away the skin, and like if you see two eyes and a brain and a central nervous system, two eyes and a brain and a central nervous system of a lab rat, it's almost identical to two eyes and a brain and a central nervous system of a dog. So for some reason, we look at the exterior. Another reason why humans make terrible choices is serotonin and dopamine. We create narratives that make us feel good. And so the narratives oftentimes make us feel good, but also enable us to have like a blind spot, Which is why people can ostensibly be self-interested and want to be healthy, but still go to McDonald's and still smoke cigarettes. Because thinking about themselves as healthy makes them feel good, but smoking cigarettes makes them feel good. The same way like people loving animals makes them feel good. They feel connected to their dog, but then they go to KFC and that gives them a dopamine trigger. And the way that the brain works is when it feels good, it wants more of whatever makes it feel good. And so it will create either narratives or blind spots to support the dopamine release that really for the last as long as there have been brains are organized around feeling good, I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but it's like neuroscience 101, and that's what enables people to love dogs and eat other animals. I mean, humanely raised meat. I mean, to me, that sort of falls, like, linguistically, it's kind of like saying, like, humane genocide. Would Hitler be less of a monster if the concentration camps had been nice places? Like, no, the end result is suffering and death. You can't have a humane process that results in suffering and murder. Like if you have a serial killer who's nice, like if you watch Silence of the Lambs and if Buffalo Bob was nice to Jodie Foster before trying to kill her, would he be less of a monster? It's like, no, you're still robbing someone of their life, which collectively almost, we all agree that's the least ethical thing someone can do. I grew up, and I'm ashamed of this, but when I was really young, I was actually a competitive fisherman. When I was like from age 7 to about 12. And I loved fishing because I did it with my grandfather, and I won some trophies, and I was good at it, and it was culturally a nice thing to do. But as anyone will tell you who's ever been fishing, fish don't want to get caught. They don't want to have a hook pulled through their mouth, and they don't want to be deprived of their lives. Like when you catch a fish, as I did many times when I was really young, you realize pretty quickly it will do everything in its power to go back into the water and go back to its life. And when you maybe it's anthropomorphizing, but I don't think so. Because like when you look at a fish that you've caught, and it has a hook in its mouth, and it's bleeding, and it's gasping for air, it's panicking. The same way we would panic if we had a hook in our mouth and were dragged into an unfamiliar environment. So the only way someone could say that fish don't feel pain is if they've never experienced a fish in pain. But it's also worth remembering, like for the longest time, pre-civil rights and pre-emancipation, people said that African Americans didn't feel pain. Descartes actually said that only white men are capable of feeling pain. He said everything else is just a conditioned response. Well, dogs are not carnivores. Dogs, for the last few 100,000 years, have, in a very symbiotic way, evolved with humans. So we are omnivores. Dogs are omnivores. Dogs are closer to carnivores than we are, but they're still omnivores. Cats are carnivores. Alligators are carnivores. You know, like, and the way you can figure out whether something is a carnivore, an herbivore, an omnivore is you just look at their physiology. You know, look at their teeth, look at their gastrointestinal tract. You know, like a jaguar has a really short intestinal tract because the goal is to get the food in, which is meat, and get it out as quickly as possible before it starts rotting. A jaguar only has tearing teeth. They don't have grinding teeth, you know, and so you look at dogs, you look at humans, like physiologically humans are much closer to herbivores. You know, like on the scale of like carnivore to herbivore, humans are here, you know. Dogs are somewhere in the middle. But because dogs have had this symbiotic relationship with humans for now hundreds of thousands of years, they've adapted. Dogs can eat anything and be pretty happy and healthy. And I say that because I've had vegan dogs for years and they do really well. You know, cats, it's more of a struggle. There are certain amino acids that cats require, like taurine, that it's hard to get in the vegan diet. Dogs, I know tons of vegan dogs who thrive. They do better on a vegan diet than on a carnivorous diet. An animal shelter, the basic goal of an animal shelter is to save animals' lives. It is logically very inconsistent to save animals' lives by killing other animals. I just don't understand the logic of save one animal but kill 10 other animals to keep it alive. You know, either you love animals or you don't. Either you want animals to live or you don't. There's no gray area. So the idea of like killing farm animals to keep a dog alive just doesn't make any sense to me. Like in city shelters, and this was very frustrating. I went down to City Hall and I testified about why I think shelters should not feed meat to dogs. And the argument from, of course, the dog food lobbyist, his argument was, oh, vegan food can give dogs diarrhea. And I was like, so let me get this straight. So you take a dog from the street and that dog has been eating garbage. It's been eating dead rats. It's been eating whatever it can find in the gutter. And you're saying that healthy vegan food is going to make it sick. It was the most absurd argument I've ever heard. But obviously this guy was getting money from the pet food industry. You know, he's subsidized by it. So it's like he's just doing his master's bidding. But I mean, there are now, you know, legitimate companies who make vegan dog food. You know, not just hippies in a garage like stirring brown rice and lentils together. Although the truth is, if you feed your dog brown rice and lentils, you'll probably have a pretty happy, healthy dog. But, you know, some of these companies who are making commercially available, science-tested vegan dog food, they wouldn't be succeeding if it wasn't working. You know, and they wouldn't be succeeding if there wasn't legitimate science behind it. There's nothing about raising animals for human consumption that is sustainable. You know, 90% of rainforest deforestation comes from animal agriculture. 45% of California's water goes to animal agriculture. And the most damning statistic, well, one of the most damning statistics, 45% of climate change comes from animal agriculture. Not to mention, every year, 100 billion land animals are killed by and for human and pet consumption. That's nothing about that sustainable. You know, it's not just destroying animals, it's not just destroying the environment, it's destroying us. And it's destroying the companion animals as well. I mean, so many of my friends have companion animals who are battling human illnesses. You know, cancer, heart disease, diabetes. It's because they're being fed garbage. You know, feeding dogs a healthy vegan diet isn't just a way to sort of reduce animal suffering and reduce, the number of animals who are being killed, it actually is better for the dogs. It will help them to avoid, human health problems that dogs shouldn't be suffering from. A friend of mine's mom was a dog breeder. It's a casual, it was like almost more like a hobby. So she had 10 Jack Russells. And to feed them, she would take dog food and like dump it in a tub and add water to it. One time, she put the food in the tub, added water to it, and then got distracted and forgot about it. And when she came back, it had separated. And she almost started throwing up when she saw what was in the dog food. There are lots of things that can be included in commercial dog food. Fingernails, hair, disgusting, disgusting things that are technically protein. So she had no idea, but like after this, she was like, what do I do? Like, I love these dogs. How can I feed them this horrifying garbage? There is an ironic aspect to a lot of commercial dog food, which is a lot of it is largely vegan. When I went to City Hall and you had the shill who was working for the dog food industry, he was asked a question and he got really uncomfortable. The question was, what percentage of the food being currently fed to the dogs in the shelter is vegan? And he was like, and he started mumbling, and someone said, no, you should know, like what percentage, and when you look at a can of dog food or a bag of dog food, what percentage of it is vegan? Turns out 90%. 90% of the food that was already being fed to them is corn, soy, wheat, is vegan. So clearly, it's just ironic that we're having this conversation when a lot of commercial dog food is already predominantly vegan. Personally, I believe that every living being on the planet, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, simply has its own life. And with that own life comes its own basic rights and its own ability to pursue its own innate will. And it's just not our place to intrude upon that, It's interesting, and if you are looking at it from a sort of like theological perspective, or a Judeo-Christian perspective, like in the Bible, it says that humans have been given dominion over animals, which has been used to justify horrible atrocities. We don't understand on an etymological level the word dominion. Dominion means to treat in a godlike manner. Like how many hymns are like, oh, Domine. Domine is God. So dominion is for us to behave like God. To behave with mercy, with compassion, with love and respect. And what God tortures and imprisons and eats? Animals. Like, what if God treated us the way we treat other animals? What if God locked us in cages and force-fed us and separated us from our children and our loved ones and then butchered us and ate us? That would be a pretty horrifying God. So we've become that horrifying God. So that argument that in the wild animals kill other animals, so therefore we should be allowed to kill animals. We don't live in the wild. We stopped living in the wild a long time ago. Also, dogs have been cohabitating with us for hundreds of thousands of years. So on one hand, I can say, what happens in the wild? It's none of our business. What happens in a self-sustaining ecosystem without humans? None of our business. We don't live in a self-sustaining ecosystem devoid of humans. So when people make the argument that like, oh, in the wild, animals kill other animals, I'm like, but there's not a single thing about my life or your life or anyone who's watching his life. There's nothing natural about our lives. I am wearing clothes most likely made from cotton that grew in Bangladesh, assembled in Malaysia, recording this on a metal and glass and plastic camera assembled possibly in Taiwan or somewhere. As cars drive by, that have synthetic ingredients or synthetic components that we can't even conceive of, there's nothing natural about our lives. So to selectively say, okay, 99.99999% of our lives have nothing to do with nature, but to use nature as a justification for something, for torture and for murder, and for wholesale suffering, it's mind-boggling just how asinine that is. If you feed a vegan diet to your dogs, or if you feed a vegan diet to your companion animals, the dogs benefit, environment benefits, the animals who aren't being killed benefit, and selfishly, ultimately, we benefit. By reducing climate change, by reducing water use, by reducing rainforest deforestation. So by switching over to a vegan diet for humans and for companion animals, everybody benefits. The only people who don't benefit are the shareholders of companies who make conventional dog food. Not surprisingly, they're the ones fighting back the most. But then again, the shareholders of tobacco companies were the ones fighting back against tobacco legislation, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just safe to say that you should never really listen too much to someone who's economically self-interested in a bad industrial process. Well, the future of how we feed companion animals is the future of how we feed us. First, there's no guarantee there will be a future. The climate apocalypse is getting underway and it's going to be really bad. But working under the benign assumption that there will be some sort of future for our species, everything points to the fact that the world will be vegan, 100%. For health reasons, for animal rights reasons, for environmental reasons, for healthcare expenditure reasons, for ocean acidification reasons, for water use reasons, for other resource use reasons. Everything points to a 100% vegan future. It just involves looking at evidence and applying, reason and compassion to a situation that right now is really broken. If I could talk to people who feed animal products to their dogs, I would say, one, how wonderful it is that you love your dog, and your dog loves you in return. And I know that you want to do what's best for your dog. You're an animal lover and you care deeply. I've had vegan dogs, they do really well. And by having vegan dogs, you don't have to be ethically compromised anymore. You can love all animals and not just a very select few. Well, I think that at times in my life I've been very selfish, and paradoxically, the more selfish I've been, the less happy I've been. And the more I live in service of a cause that's much bigger than me, that I care about very deeply, the happier I am. So there's a selfish component to it. But also, there's a degree of utilitarianism. I take a step back and I look at the world in which we live. And if one of the reasons I'm a vegan and an animal rights activist is because I believe that all lives are precious, I can't see my own life as being different or better than the lives of any of the animals that I love. And I have one life, other animals have one life. If I could give up my one life to save the lives of multiple animals, yeah, to me it just makes sense. I don't see humans in some hierarchical, being at the top of some hierarchical chain where we're the top of the pyramid. We're different. We're weird hairless apes who figured out how to make electricity. Doesn't make us better or worse than other creatures. So If I value all lives relatively equally, it means that I have to be willing to sacrifice my own life for the greater good.